This is Gemara Yevamos Daf Mem Dalid. All the learning for the rest of the month of Nisan has been generously sponsored by a close friend of the Daf, L'Zechanishas Chaim Mordechai ben Naftali Tzvi, whose second yard site is after Yontif on Chavzai Nisan. Mir Hashem of the learning of the entire Chabura should bring Chaim Mordechai ben Naftali Tzvi to an higher place and Gan Eden Shamayla, as well as in the Chama to the entire family, as well as the learning spree as Chaim Devar Tavrtubas Barach Shalom Levidavo Ovik Ben Teli Shema Ben Chaya Bluma Yehuda Zabas Asima Malka, as well as the Luz for Shlomo Shmuel Yosef Ben Yerfeda Shmuel Ben Tila Naftali Zima Echlas and Chama Bas Shivas Ar Bluma Bas Mendel Chaim Moshe Yeshua Ben Malka B'Sheva Vega Bashir Chana B'Soich Sha'ar Chayle Yisrael. We are holding on the very bottom of Mem Gimel Amid Beis. Baruch Hashem, we're back on schedule. Hopefully, going forth, the shirim will be up early. Hopefully, b'siyat d'shmaya, the same will be even before the last days of Yom Tif. And now we begin with the Mishnah on the bottom of Mem Gimel Amid Beis. Says the Mishnah, Araba Achim Nesuain Araba Nashim. 4 brothers married to 4 women, not sisters, not relatives. 4 brothers married to 4 different women, Umesu. And unfortunately, all 4 brothers die. So what happens? Their wives fall to Yibam to a remaining brother. Says the Mishnah, if the oldest brother, let's say they leave a 5th or 6th brother, the oldest one wants to do Yibam, he could do Yibam to all of them. Part 1 of the Mishnah. Part 2 of the Mishnah. If someone is married to 2 women, one person married to 2 wives, of course, being mutter bisman chazal, umeis, and that person is nifter, and thereby his 2 wives fall to even to the brother. Doing yibam or doing chalitza to one of the wives, paiteres sarasa patters up the tzara halacha that we've seen many times. As we turn over to today's Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, a third din, haisa achas kesheira v'achas besula. And actually, this is a halacha that we saw in the very beginning of the Masechta and Daf Yud Aleph, and this is the makar, this is the place. If one of the woman is kosher and one of the women is pasul, which of course we have to define exactly what that means. Says the Mishnah, if the brother is choosing to do chalitza, which woman should he do chalitza to? To the one that is pasul. If he's choosing to do yibam, then he should do yibam to the brother, Then he should do yibam to the wife that is kosher. So, 2 parts of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah dealing with 4 different women married to 4 brothers, and a 5th brother doing yibum to all of them. And then the second half of the Mishnah dealing with a person with 2 wives, in which doing yibum or chalitza to one patters the other. Part 1. Part 2, if one is kosher, one is pasul, then chalitza to the psul, yibum is to the one that is kosher. Today, we will basically be dealing with this Mishnah. Says the Gemara, it sounds like there are 4 brothers. Said the Mishnah, they die. The 5th brother does Yibam. But it sounds like in the Mishnah there are only 4 brothers. Explains the Gemara, you know what the Mishnah means? Arba me'achim. 4 of the brothers are nifter, and of course there are other remaining brothers, as we spoke out. Continues the Gemara, Arshus biyadai. What is the halacha that if the 5th brother wants to do Yibam to all of them, he is allowed? Asks the Gemara, Vishavki lei. Says the Gemara, does Bezdin allow him to do Yibam, to marry all 4 of these women? V'atanya, we learned in a Brais, and they called him the elders of the city. And we learn out from this pasuk, they themselves, the elders, call not their shluchim. Love, and they speak to him, speak to the one potentially performing Gimel and Lamed. What does this teach us? They give him advice. They give him something that is fitting to him. What do you mean? What's the advice? Explains the Gemara. Let's say the woman that falls to Yibam is an older woman and the brother is a younger brother, not a big age gap. Or Who's zaken v'hi yalda? If one brother is old and the one fallen to him is young, Aimrim Lai, these elders give him advice. Malacha, what do you have to do till yalda? Let's just give an example. You're 60 and she's 17. What do you have to do with such a girl? Malacha itzal zakena. Or you're 17 and she's 65. What do you have to do with the zakena? They tell him, advice, don't do Yibam. Go and marry and find someone of your own age. And do not create fighting in your house. So asks the Gemara, just like we give advice, that if the Yibam, if there's a tremendous age gap, we tell him, don't do it. It's just going to cause you a heartache. So too, asks the Gemara, we assume marrying 4 women is quite a financial burden, and we assume he's not going to be able to handle it. So why do we not tell him, don't do it? The Mishnah makes it sound like, no problem. Do even told 4? Why is that true? Explains the Gemara, he has the cash. He can marry 4 women, no problem. Says the Gemara, so why 4? Let there be 6, let there be 8 wives. Why limit it? Explains the Gemara, no, Eitz Taiva Kamashlan, it's still giving you an Eitz Taiva that what? Talid, to marry 4 women in, that's allowed. Not that's allowed, that's a good advice. Tfei, to marry more, like, why? So that each woman will have at least 1 aina in a month. Of course, the most basic and regular obligation of Aina being, as Rashi here points out, 5 lines into the medium-sized lines, the Aina V'Tav Chacham is once a week. Once a week, he has the obligation to sleep with his wife, and therefore, says the Gemara, if you have 4 wives, each one will have once they're a week, each one will have once a month. And therefore, we call chaydesh aina b'chaydesh, and that's the good advice that we give him. Explains the Gemara further, Mishnah. So that's part A of the Mishnah. So part A of the Mishnah, 4 brothers. What does it really mean? There are more brothers. Why? What's the Mishnah teaching us? What's the chiddush? That we give him good advice. 4, if you could handle it financially, okay. More, you should not. Not because of finances, because of one's conjugal obligations to his wife. Then the Mishnah continues, Misha Yanasli, son who's married to women, and we said Yibam to one, Pater's the other, Chalitza to one, Pater's the other. And then part B of the second half of the Mishnah was, if one is kosher, one is puzzled, Chalitza lipsol, Yibam to the Kshera. So says the Gemara, V'niyam the Tervayu, I don't understand. You told me you do Yibam to one, Pater's the other. Why? Do Yibam to both. And of course, this is reminiscent. We had a lot of these klalim in the beginning of the Masechta, but here we get to learn the source where it all came from. So Amar Rav Chia Barav Amar Rav Yechon Amar Kra, it says in the Torah Shelo Yivnes Beis Achiv, that you cannot build the house of your brother. Bayis Echad Hu Bayne Ve'in Bayne Shnei Batim. Says the Gemara from here we darshan you can only build one house and not 2. Only 1 yibum is allowed and not 2 from the same husband. Says the Gemara, okay, but v'nachlis the tervayu. If you're choosing chalitza, why don't you have to do chalitza to both? The pasuk says the house of the one that does chalitza. From here we darshan by his echadu chayleitz v'eno chayleitz shnei vatim. Says the Gemara, okay, but let's ask further. V'niyavim l'chada v'nechleitz l'chada. Why don't we do bayis echad? Great, 1 yibam, 1 chalitza. Why is the Mishnah suggesting that 1 yibam patters everyone, 1 chalitza patters everyone? Do yibam and chalitza once. Amar Kra darshans the Gemara Yach Boitz. It says if you don't want to do yibam, do chalitza. Ha chafetz, if you want yiyabim, you should do yibam. And from here we darshan the drasha which we've had many times already. So reason number 1 says the Gemara that once there is even with 1, there cannot be any more chalitz with anyone else, because then that second person is not chazi, is not fit for yibam, and that's the reason why 1 yibam per husband. Void asks the Gemara, another reason why you can't do Yibam to one to Chalitza to other, because we don't want people to say that you're building part of your brother's house. Says the Gemara, is what everyone's wondering. V'yimru, who cares? Let people say that you're building part of your brother's house. Why does that bother you? Explains the Gemara, you're right. If you do Yibam to one wife, and then you do Chalitza to other wife, in this detail of what people would say, it doesn't bother us. You know what our concern is? You're first going to do Chalitza, then you're going to do Yibam. And of course, you're not allowed to do that. Why now? Once you do Chalitza, it's over. Once you didn't build, Shov lo yibane, you're not allowed to build anymore. So once you did Chalitza, nothing's allowed. That is the concern. Ask the Gemara of Eimo, why don't we say, Ki ika chado, this guy mitzvahs Yibam, Ki ika tarti, lo, this guy mitzvahs Yibam. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Based on everything that we just said, that it sounds like there's only one Yibam per house, one Chalitza per house, why don't we say that the whole concept of Yibam and Chalitza only exists when there is a one potential. But ki'ika tarti, but whenever there are two women, whenever there are two Yevamos, maybe the whole mitzvah of Yibam does not apply. Explains the Gemara in Kain Zaras Erva the Asar Achman Alamali. Number one, why would we need the Torah to say the Tsaras Erva, the whole beginning of the first parak, the Chamish Esrei Ervais, Sarais, V'Sarais are saying all the co-wives are Asar. Why do we need to teach that? It wouldn't apply. Says the Gemara, if there would never be a concept whenever there were two co-wives, certainly when there were not to be the tzara, the co-wife of an erva. But says the Gemara, why does that bother you, this last question? It's the I would have thought that the erva is not included in the yibum. You can't do yibum to the erva, and therefore maybe specifically in the case of a tzara of an erva, that's when there would yes be yibum, because you can't do yibum to the erva, you have to do to the tzara. Kamashman dasira. Therefore, that's the pasuk teaching you that it's asar. Ela yevimta riba. Says the Gemara, the Torah says yevimta. That comes to include two Yevamos are included in the potential Yibam and Chalitza. But of course, you can only do Yibam or Chalitza to one, but do not suggest that the entire obligation of Yibam and Chalitza does not exist, because Yevimtai. Says the Gemara, the last little piece before we get to the Mishnah, is Achas Kesheira. Again, going on the case from 7 lines from the wide lines, we're discussing the case in which one of these two wives is kosher, one is pasul. We said if you're going to do Yibam, do it to the Kesheira. If you're going to do Chalitza, do it to Psula. Amar Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef Kanchan, Rabbi here, Rabbi taught us, don't spill out water that other people need. Meaning, if you're going to do Yibam, do it to the Ksheira. If you're going to do Chalitza, do it to the Psula. Don't do it to the Ksheira, because then you're going to make her more Aser to more women, in which the Gemara dealt with already extensively. Says the Mishnah, a new topic, the topic of Hamachzir Grushasai. We know the halacha, when someone divorces a woman, you're allowed to remarry her, but only if no one remarries her in the interim. We dealt with this already extensively. But says of the Mishnah, if someone does indeed remarry his own divorcee after she married someone else, or someone does chalitza to his brother's wife and then he marries her, or number 3, he marries the relatives of the woman that he did chalitza to, in which we learned last week that once you do chalitza, there was some level of zika there, all the relatives are forbidden. What's the halacha? Says Rabbi Akiva the first time in the Mishnah, Yoitzei in all 3 cases, whether you return to your chalutza, the relatives of the chalutza, whether it's one marries the divorcee after she married someone else, number 1, you must get divorced. Number 2, if any child is born, that kid is a mamzer. The Chachamim argue emphatically on the whole din. Ein avlan mamzer. The din is not, we'll see in the Gemara what I just meant, but says the Chachamim, the child is not a mamzer. And concludes the Mishnah, a bit of maybe a cryptic statement, which the Gemara will explain. Umaydim, and they admit, seemingly referring to the Chachamim, Beinoisei Kroivas Gerushasai Shevlan Mamzer, that someone marries the relative of the Gerusha, the Vad is a Mamzer. And the reason why it's a bit cryptic is because what's the Umaydim? The first part of the Mishnah didn't deal with the Karov of the Gerusha, which we'll get to in a moment. So we have a machlokes or v'kiyan the chachamim whether this child will be a mamzer. Asks the Gemara, the last narrow line, Mem Dalet Amud Aleph, V'savar Rav Akiva Anoisei Korovas Chalutzasai Avlan Mamzer. Does Rav Akiva really hold that in the case in which one does chalitza and marries the relative of that woman, the child is a mamzer? V'amarei Shlakish Kanchan Rabbi Achas Gerusha Midivrei Torah, Achas Chalutza Midivrei Seifrim. That marrying the sister of one's chalutza, the relative of the chalutza, is only a din derabanan. So asks the Gemara, if it's only a din derabanan, how in the world could Rav Akiva say the child's a mamzer? Derabanan diki yisurim cannot create a mamzer. Explains the Gemara, Dani Kuroivas Gerushasai. That what does the Mishnah mean? Kuroivas Chalutzasai. We'll highlight on the second line of the Mishnah. It doesn't mean Kuroivas Chalutzasai. It means Kuroivas Gerushasai. And says the Gemara, now the point that we pointed out at the end of the Mishnah, now is beautiful. This is very logical. Dikatani Seifa, what was that last line in the Mishnah in which we pointed out was a bit odd? So we, Amr Bishlama, like the Gemara just answered, Iriba, that we're discussing the Karov of the Gerusha in the first part of the Mishnah. Now the Umaydim, they admit in the end of the Mishnah makes sense. Because the first part of the Mishnah dealt with this case, Umaydim and the Chacham admit in that case. But if you're going to tell me, don't change the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah is as it is read. It's referring to the Karov of the Chalutza. Mayumaydim, what are they admitting to the first part of the Mishnah? Did not discuss that case at all. Says the Gemara, whoa, slow down. V'delma, hakamash malan, but perhaps the Mishnah is teaching us in the last line of the Maidim, that maybe the Mishnah is teaching me that the Chachamim argue on Rav Akiva, and they admit that there is mamzer from Chayvei Krisis. That even though the Chachamim say Ein Avlan mamzer in the case of Chayvei Lavin, but in the case of Chayvei Krisos, they admit. Says the Gemara, can't be. Come on, we learn later on. Izeu mamzer kol shu basar. Kol she'er basar shehu, any kol she'er basar shehu b'lo yavai, any relative that is within the lav, the negative commandment of lo yavai, cannot come to God. So different Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon HaTeimani Omer kol shechayvim love karis b'dei shamayim ve'halacha kidvarav, and the halacha is like Shimon HaTeimani. So since the Mishnah already taught us that a mamzer is only from kares, why would our Mishnah have to say Umaydim? There's only a mamzer from kares. The Mishnah already taught us that. So that can't be. Says Gemara, 1 second. What do you mean? Maybe our Mishnah is a stam Mishnah like Shimon HaTeimani. Explains the Gemara in Cain, 6 lines to the bottom, listening She'ar Chayvei Krisos. It should have listed any other case of Chayvei Krisos. Koroivas Grushasai Lamali, why does it hone in on this specific case? Umaydim Benoisi Koroivas Grushasai, why? Elashmamina Ayriba. Says the Gemara, it must be there of Akiva as well as discussing that case. Says the Gemara, we're not happy yet. Again, we're just proving the Gemara's answer. The Delma, perhaps Ilam Lo Ayriba. Really, Rav Akiva is not talking about the Karav of the Gusha. Really, Rav Akiva is talking about the Karlev of the Chalutza. V'haidi detani machse grushasai, v'noise chalutzasai, v'kroivas chalutzasai, tarinami, kroivas grushasai. Says the Gemara, wait, maybe we're not really talking about this at all. But with the fourth case, that's like within the same thought process. That's why the Mishnah listed it. Ella, says the Gemara, let's go back. Kroivas chalutzasai, Rav Akiva ave mamzer. You're right. We have no raya. Do not change the wording of the Mishnah. Really, according to Rabbi Kiva, the karov of the chalutza is indeed a mamzer. And that's what the first part of the Mishnah reads. So Amar Rav Chia bar Abba Amar Rav Yochanan who time with Rabbi Kiva. Where did Rabbi Kiva get this? This goes back. The Gemara started off and the Gemara said, are you really telling me that Karoivas Chalutzasa is a mamzer according to Rabbi Kiva? The Gemara didn't understand it because it's only an Isid Rabbanan. So after a whole back and forth, the Gemara says, no, that is what Rabbi Kiva holds. So says the Gemara, where does he get this from? Says in the pasuk, the house of the one that removed the shoe that did chalitza. Hakasav karoi beisai. The pasuk calls chalutzasai beisai his wife, and therefore from there we see that there's some level of iser deraisa here, and therefore on the kraivim it makes sense that Rabbi Kiva holds that it is a mamzer. So we're concluding that the first part of the Mishnah reads as is. The Rav Kiva holds kroivas chalutzasai indeed creates a mamzer. So now says the Gemara, let's go into the first part of the Mishnah. The machzir grushasai. Rav Kiva said the kid's a mamzer. The Chachamim said no. Says the Gemara on the last line, Mandal Amar Aleph, Amar Rav Yisif from Shimon Re'ebi, Akomaydim and Machzir Grushasai. Everyone admits in Machzir Grushasai, we turn over to Memdalid, Amid Beis, Shavlad Pogum Lekuna. Everyone agrees if someone marries the divorcee after she marries someone else and they have a child, that kid is pogum, is tainted. What does it mean he's tainted? He's not allowed to marry Hakayin. Says the Gemara, top line, man hakol maidim. Who is this hakol maidim? Everyone admits this din. Shemanate money. Even though normally if it's just an isser lav, a negative commandment, but not a commandment that contains kares, then shemanate money says the kid is not a mamzer. So in this case, a machzir grushasa is a negative commandment, it's a lav. Still, but Shimonate money is maida that the kid is a pogum, can't marry a kohen. He's not a mamzer, but he's a pogum, he is tainted. And how do we know this? Mikal v'chaymer me'almana. We learn this out from almana. That what? Umal almana lekohen gadol she'ni sir shava ba'kol, and almana to kohen gadol. He's not an Isser that applies to everyone. She's only Asr, an Almana, a woman whose husband dies, is Asr to marry a Kohen Gadol, and yet, Binna Pagum, and yet her child that came, if she went Be'isr. Again, a woman whose husband died, she's an Alman. She's not going to marry a Kohen Gadol. If she did, the child that is born is what? Pagum is tainted, that cannot marry. Koyanim, Zu, this case that we're discussing, She'isura Shavar B'kol, the Machzir Gushasai, which applies equally to everyone. Every person in Klal Yisrael is not allowed to marry his Gusha after she marries someone else. Einoidin Kalvachaymer Shabana Pagum, that the child is tainted, the child cannot marry a Koyin, and that is the source of that. I call Moidim, even Shimon Atimani will admit that the child born from a machzir gushasai, a one who takes back his divorcee after she marries someone else, the child is tainted. Says the Gemara once again, a simple question, a simple way to differentiate between the almana to the kohen gadol and our case. When she, the almana, the woman whose husband dies, when she goes and marries and sleeps with the kohen gadol be'isr, she herself is mischaleles. She herself is desecrated. So maybe that's why her child is a pagum. But in our case, when someone remarries his divorcee, what? She herself is not tainted. She herself is kosher to marry anyone else. Question number one, differentiating between machzir gushas in our case. Question number two, it says when someone is machzir gushasai, it says she is a ta'eva. She is rejected. What's the implication? Vein but not ta'eva. But the child is not rejected. Question number two. Question number three, what did our Mishnah say? Rabbi Akiva, actually it's not our Mishnah, it's a brisa. That in these three cases, Rabbi Akiva says there's no kedushin. You don't have to get divorced. She is possible, the kid's possible. We force you to leave her. Shitas Rabbi Akiva. This is what I was referring to in the Mishnah when I said they argue on everything. Yesh la b'kedusha in the marriage is chal. Again, this is about someone who remarries his divorcee, remarries his chalutza, etc. And the shrichamen get you need to get. Vik shira and she's kosher, blood the kosher, the kid is kosher. So says the Gemara, machlokes chacham and Rabbi Akiva. So explains the Gemara this brisa leman. Whom is the kid kosher according to the Chachamim? Lav lekuna. So what do we see? We see according to Shitas Chachamim, the kid is not a pagum. You just told me, call maitim. Everyone agrees the kid is a pagum. But we see clearly the Chachamim do not agree. So 3 questions on the comparison between Almana and Kohen Gadol to our case. The Gemara now is going to dissect comparison number 3 question, and then dissect comparison number 2 question, and then try to ask in comparison number 1, which we will not be able to ask, and therefore we'll have to reinvent the whole thing. Let's get to it in the last few remaining minutes. Says the Gemara, no, that's not what the end of the brisa means. Lekal, it means the kid is kosher to marry into Klal Yisrael. He asked the Gemara, Yikeshera, says she herself is kosher, the divorcee herself, Laman. Just because she was mizaneh, you're going to tell me because she had a bia be'isr, she cohabited in an inappropriate way, you're going to tell me that she's not allowed to be married into Klal Yisrael? And therefore says the Gemara, seemingly it's a raya that they could marry a kohen. Says the Gemara, no. A very classical Gemara answer. Of course, we always like to maintain parallelism between Mishnayos, between Brises, that the Reisha and the Seifa are referring to the same case. But says the Gemara, no, it's not true. It doesn't have to be that way. Each one is talking about a different case. And now the Gemara proves it, because it's not such a geshmak thing for each part of the Bryce and the Mishnah to talk about a different case. Says the Gemara, it's indeed logical. Why is it logical? Because it says in the Reisha, with regard to Rabbi Akiva, she is puzzle and the kid is puzzle. Who is the kid puzzle? Who is she puzzle to? That makes no sense. Elalav the kuna must be that she's puzzle the kuna. Uvlad the basel. What does it mean the kid's puzzle? Laman ilim the kuna. Holy called kosher. You're gonna tell me according to Rav Akiva the kid is kosher to marry the Klal Yisrael? Amar Rav Akiva v'lan mamzer elabshita lekol umidareisha alekisa v'akidisa. In the reisha itself, we see that with regard to her, it's referring to the kohen. With regard to the kid, it's referring to Klal Yisrael. So says the Gemara, question number 3, comparison between Almana the Kohen Gadol, Binah Pagum, that the child born is tainted, cannot marry a Kohen, and our case of Machzor Gushas, someone remarries his divorcee Be'isr, to say the child is tainted is not a good comparison. Now we go back to comparison number 2. We said that when it says by Machzor Gushas, the Torah says she is rejected, implying but the kid is not. Says the Gemara, no, that's not what it implies. It says that she is rejected, but means that Sarah, the co-wife, has nothing to do with the kid. But indeed I'll tell you the kid is a toeva. But now let's go back to the first comparison between the cases of Almana the Kohen Gadol and Machzor Gushasai Be'isr El Almana L'Kasha. But the etzim comparison between Almana the Kohen Gadol is difficult. Ma'almana Shkiatzma Mischaleles, because in that case she herself is usher, she is desecrated. So says the Gemara, that is one bomb kasha, saying Almana l'Kohen Gadol cannot be the source to our din of Machzor Gushasai. So we don't have a source that Machzor Gushasai, the kid is tainted. Eli Itmar, so says the Gemara, let's go back and let's learn. Amar Rav Yosef, Rav Shimon, Rav Yaakov, Maidim, that what? Then in case of chayvei krisos, the kid is pagum. Mana kol maidim Rav Yeshua. Davagavdam Rav Yeshua in mamzer mechayvei krisos. Nei de mamzer loyave pagum miavi mikavachem realmanam amon lekagol sheni sushav bekol ben apagum su shizushav bekol and then shebena. So it's not a din about Machzor Gushasai, it's a din about Chayvei Krisos. V'chitema malmanik sheniyatim eschalelas achanami kivin shebayla asa zayna. Since she was bala, she's made into a zayna. We'll pick it up from Rabbi Chanan the next year. B'siyata dishmaya.